Okay, I'm going to make a pendant. And I'm going to show you a technique for hanging the pendant. Now this is a piece of heat treat, 450 degrees. Nice and glossy. It did break right there, but I think that was just an internal defect. I'm finding out that this coastal plains chert doesn't need much more than 400 degrees in most cases. In fact, if I stay at 400, I'm probably safe and not risking having some issues like cracking and crazing if I stay at 400. So I think the next batch of heat treats is going to stay around 400. Yeah. I got another batch of heat treat almost ready to go. Sitting over there. I'll put it in overnight. I have a heat treat batch going every other day. And I'll have it doing that until I heat treat all the stone I got. And that includes all my old stuff I have in the yard too. I have a stack of unheat treated stone. Most of it is the gray stuff, not colorful stuff like this. So it's not that exciting as far as my old stuff. The new stuff is good. Now, someone asked me if I like this stuff better than Flint Ridge. Well, I get really nervous when I'm knapping Flint Ridge because I never know when it's going to snap on me. So yeah, I prefer this over that because at least I know I have some indication of when this is going to snap. I can see defects in it and stuff. It's not really that finicky. I can nap this with a lot of force. So far, so good. All the pieces I've tried napping, I can nap with a lot of force, and it's okay. So it's more predictable. This is very similar in predictability to heat-treated root beer. As long as the root beer chert is heat-treated properly. Root beer chert also breaks up and becomes crazed. This one doesn't craze as easy as the root beer cherts. But it ends up with a very similar texture in some cases. A lot of this, though, reminds me of Ocala chert. I think I've mentioned that before. Ocala is very snappy. It starts to get really weak as you heat treat it. Of course, it's very, very difficult to nap if it's not heat treated. The Ocala stuff. I find it very difficult to nap if it's not heat treated. This one I can nap raw as well, and it's not that bad. But I prefer the heat treat because I often notch the pieces, and if you want to do notching or any kind of fancy flaking, it's best to heat treat, or you're going to suffer unless you like using a lot of pressure. Some guys like using a lot of pressure. That's perfectly fine. If you like that sort of thing, it's perfectly fine. So this particular piece is pretty straightforward. Yeah, I've got something going on. I think I'm not catching a cold, but there's something going on. Some sort of allergens in the air or something are making me feel tired and stuff. Anyway. The tips and the bases are difficult in general for me if I don't pay attention to them and do it just right. The midsection of the workpiece isn't too bad as far as difficulty, but the tips and the bases, to do them really well, is extremely difficult for me. I think I've mentioned that before. Pretty sure. Many times. Why? I don't know. I've taken time out to focus on tips and bases and still have difficulty. Usually when I take time to focus on a certain aspect, it gets better. Like, I focused a long time on avoiding step fractures and they got a lot better. As far as avoiding the step fractures. But avoiding damage to tips and bases has been something that has eluded me for a long time. Still can't get it just right. See, I normally can get flakes to come off, but for some reason, and I don't know if it's because I'm losing, it's not because I'm losing energy. Somehow I'm losing the ability to catch the edge just right. I can catch the edge in other areas, but as soon as I get near the tip, for some reason I cannot catch the edge. And I got to overcompensate and remove way too much, if I want to get something to remove, something to go. And if there's a hard spot, of course, it makes it even more difficult. I got to figure out the physics behind the tip stuff. Because if I don't, I'm always going to think it's supposed to do one thing and it's going to do something else. So yeah, physics is important to understand what's going on. You can just keep practicing and practicing and eventually you'll overcome it. Yeah. But the physics thing is just a shortcut. I like the shortcuts. I could just sit and practice and develop a technique that works in general for the tips, other than just going to town on it and hoping that it's not going to get ruined. Like I just did right now. I just went ahead and forced the issue and hoped it wouldn't get ruined. And it didn't, luckily. Okay. Yeah, the weather's been crazy too. It's hot one day, and then cold, and hot again, then cold. I think that's got me feeling strange too. Just before I started napping, I threw on an extra shirt. Now I'm too hot. Yep. I do like the way that this can be damage controlled. Yeah. With some stone, you try to damage control on it, and it just does not want to cooperate. You've just got to get it correct from the beginning on some of the stones. This particular type, I can do the damage control thing fairly easily. Yeah, there it goes. Yeah, so it's thinned down good enough. Oops, what did I do? What did I do? So yeah, I'm going to use the spatula tool this time. To shape the edge. I should have used this a lot more during the beveling videos, or the E-notch videos where I have some beveling going on. Should have used the spatula tool. It doesn't crush the edge, and I think I was getting a little bit of crushing. Not too much though. This bevels easily. When you use a spatula tool, you have a lot of surface area in contact with the workpiece, but it's not in contact with it for very long, right? So it's not going to crush it, but it'll leave a kind of a wide pop out, which makes it look like I'm using a thick tool when I'm not. Why is that important? It's not important unless you like the look of it. I like the look of, a thick tool doing the work without serrations. So spatula tool is good for doing that, making it look like you're using a thick tool, a hefty pressure flaker, and not installing serrations. It's ironic because I do use a spatula tool for serrations, but I use it the other way. I turn it the other way. Do I think they used antler tools that were shaped like spatula tips or whatever? Oh yes, I do think they use them that way. Because it works. It works pretty good. Now, you have to use stone that's easily knapped if you're using an antler spatula tool, because the antler spatula tool is kind of delicate. It works really well on Obsidian once you get used to it. Nothing works really well on Obsidian until you get used to it. That's the rule there. But once you get used to it, a flat chisel-like tip on the tool works well with Obsidian and any delicate heat treat, in my experience. All right. Your results may vary. See, the edge is not as thin as the beveled edge. Right? If you've been paying attention to the bevel edge, when I do the close-ups on the bevel edge compared to the regularly napped edges, the bevel edge actually is thinner. So people ask me, what's the best way to sharpen? And when I tell them a bevel, they don't believe me. They're going by someone else's advice. Some guys will say it's not going to be sharp unless you put serrations in it. Yeah, well, look at the results. Look at the edge. If your edge is sharp with serrations, then use that method. If it's not sharp with serrations, or if it's not really thinned down, it's not going to be sharp. Some guys cannot put in serrations with a thin edge. They blow away all the serrations. They start doing thin edges on it, and they put serrations in, and they blow away all the serrations when the edge is too thin for them. So they end up with thick edges with serrations, and they're not very sharp. The two things go together. Thinness and sharpness go together. The very edge needs to be thin. Okay? That's what makes it sharp. If it's really thick, it's not going to be sharp. Now, if it's really thick and then it just gets sharp at the very, very edge, one time that you use it, it's going to knock off that edge. It's going to be dull fast. So that's why these things are made really, really thin in some cases. So when you knock off that edge after the first use, it still remains fairly sharp because it's still thin. But if it's thick and then all of a sudden it becomes thin and sharp, once you break off that thin, sharp edge, it's dull. Yeah. So that's why you see a lot of these beveled points sharpened down to nubs, because they had to be constantly resharpened. Because it's only thin right at the very edge. Only right at the very edge. And that gets skimmed off easy during use. Yeah. All right. I'm not going to zoom in this time because it's too hard to keep it in frame. I'm just going to do this quickly. Or try to. So yeah, I'm already burning up. I shouldn't have put this shirt on. I got a t-shirt on underneath. I thought it was going to be cold already. The sun went down. But no, it stayed hot. Oh well. Yeah, I put my wristband on as a preventative measure because I've been napping all day. Probably got dehydrated earlier too. Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to do this quickly so I can show you one technique for mounting these pendants. getting close to the maximum depth on this notcher. Why don't I use my other one? Well, let's try the other one just to see how it compares. I can always file it down thinner, but I like to keep a thick one and a thin one. Now, I've been napping a lot so I can create a reserve stash of items for the auction, because there'll be some weeks coming up where I can't do anything but travel coming up in the near future, so I won't be able to prepare for the auction during those weeks, so I gotta save up stuff. Whenever I do that, I gotta make sure I don't overdo it. Sometimes you don't feel the results of the napping on your wrist or elbows or shoulders until the next day, or maybe even 2 or 3 days later. Yeah, this seems to work okay. It's a larger, the thicker notcher works okay. It's a spatula tool, yeah, but I call it a notcher when I'm using it for notching. And I'm gonna develop a vertical punch here in a not too distant future. Still working on that idea. I gotta try some things. Once I got it figured out, I'm gonna start using the vertical punch. My main issue is I can't see what I'm doing with a normal vertical punch, like a nail or something. I can't see what I'm doing. Yeah. I don't like napping just blindly. Some people can do it and not get any anxiety. Which reminds me, I watched a guy on Instagram take an ice bath middle of winter. They say taking a cold ice bath is good for preserving your longevity. You know, it creates a lot of good chemicals in the body. It increases your lifespan. Yeah, it'll increase your lifespan if you don't get hypothermia. Yeah. But I was thinking that, you know, during an anxiety episode, things start to heat up a lot. I'm thinking it'd be good anxiety therapy. You start sweating and getting all panicky, just take an ice bath. I bet you I can take an ice bath during a very anxiety intense moment. But I'll be so heated up that I won't even feel the cold water. Yeah. All right, let's see if this works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these this lanyard for my glasses and use it to mount the Arrowhead, or however you want to call it. I'm going to use it to make a necklace. And it saves a lot of time and effort. You don't need to get wire and wind it around and all that stuff. As long as these fit within the notches, it's a pretty fast, simple way of wearing an Arrowhead. Ta-da! Now it's not adjustable, but it's wearable, right? Just gotta make sure the notches are big enough so it doesn't look stupid. Because it will. These won't sit in the notch if their notches are not big enough. Anyway, I just wanted to show that. Because that's the way a friend of mine wears his, and I said, you know, that's probably the easiest way I've ever seen to wear Arrowhead as a pendant. I mean, it takes like less than 5 seconds to mount that. And it actually looks pretty good. Yeah. But you know, an expanding stem Arrowhead works, and as long as you have notches that are big enough, these will fit in there. I'm wondering, should put it in the middle. No, it's not going to look good if you do that. Now, what about the stone cutting into this rubber? Yeah, if it's doing that, you're in trouble. But anyway, there you go. That's what I wanted to show. I'll move on to the next thing on the list. The next big thing. Yeah. Alrighty.